Hello and welcome to my retro watches. Now that was a rather dramatic intro you've just seen there. Hopefully it's got you intrigued as to what might be coming up in this video. So I have got in front of me this beautiful 100-year-old Omega. Now anything that's 100 years has got stories to tell, and this watch has got a great story to tell, and I'm really excited to tell you as I try to repair it, because the watch doesn't run. I'm intrigued as to how long perhaps the watch has stayed dormant, but I'm hoping to breathe life back in it again and to breathe life into the story, because this one I'm hoping you're going to enjoy. It was sent in by a gentleman called Bill, who's been watching my channel for a while, and he thought this would be really appropriate. And Bill is already in his 80s, so it gives you a bit of a clue. This was actually Bill's father's watch, and it's his father's story, along with Bill's story, that I'll be telling. So let's go to the bench, have a closer look at it, and then I'll start the disassembly. I thought I'd start just quickly looking at the movement on the microscope, because, well, it's a work of art in itself. I love this scripted font that's been engraved. What you can quite clearly see is dirt, lots and lots of dirt. And to be fair, what I think some of this is, there's also a giant hair here. I think some of this, certainly if you start looking here in particular, does that give the game away? Look, can you see that? This, I think, is going to be superb, because that is oil, my friends. And I've seen this many a time where a watch has stopped running, probably by the owner, has decided to spray a load of oil inside, thinking that that's all the mechanics need, a bit of oil and it'll get going. Trouble is with that oil, it gets everywhere. It'll be on that hairspring and it'll gum everything up. And the oil is still, well, obviously still oily, hasn't gone hard, but equally that is also going to preserve the wheels and everything else. So I'm really hoping that all this needs is a service, just needs a really good clean and a rebuild, and we can breathe life back into it. Because if it needs parts, that might be difficult to find, but we'll see. I have never worked on a watch this old before. So this is my first ever time on a 100-year-old wristwatch, and I feel really honoured and really excited as well to have a go. You can see the split here in the balance wheel. Now that's completely normal. I believe that is to sort of self-regulate. It's thermal compensating, so as the watch would heat up or cool down, that saves any deviation in the balance and therefore tries to keep time. Just look down there at the pallet jewel, or the pivot. That looks especially dirty, doesn't it? Right, let's crack on and I can tell you the story. I'm now going to strip the watch down into its components, and along the way I'll tell you the story of this watch. But first of all, just take a look at it now, certainly out of its case. That dial is absolutely beautiful. It is an enamelled dial, beautiful calligraphy. I think the numbers are really nicely done. Hands are perfect. Yes, very vintage, but that's what they could do all those years ago. So I'm going to have to be very careful. These are the bits you see, so you want to handle with care and remove the hands. So I'll put a bit of plastic there, get the levers underneath and pry them up. And we just don't want to mark that dial, do we? Let's face it. And now we'll do the same with the second hand. It's a little bit tighter. These are very small, 2.5mm are the levers, and even those are struggling to get under there. Realistically, I need something a little bit sharper. So come back with the Presto tool, version Presto tool, and hopefully that will just nip underneath them and pull it off. But alas, no, that's not going to work either. So I'm going to resort to watchmaker's favourite, try and use a little bit of Rodico. And now, even, dare I say it, a screwdriver. And that's just enough to lift it off its pivot there. These are the dial feet screws, undo those, and then we can carefully remove that dial and put it somewhere very safe. Allow me to introduce you to Bill Sassery. Now Bill is a retired biology teacher and he's a very keen fisherman, as you can see in this photograph. Now Bill left a comment on a video a very long time ago now saying he'd got this Omega watch that he wanted to give to me. And now that obviously tweaked my interest, and I got in contact with Bill to ask a few questions about what he meant by that. And Bill then tells me a story that this watch was his father's, and Bill is now 80 years old, I believe, and he wanted it to go to somebody who would appreciate it and repair it and possibly restore it. Bill then proceeded to tell me the story of his father and his own story, which was very, very interesting. And from that basis I said, well look, send me the watch, let me have a go, let me see if I can restore it, and let me tell the world the story of your father. Bill's family originate from Hungary. His father Julius was born in 1898 and he served in the Royal Hungarian Gendarme in around 1918 to 1924. Here's a photo of him back then. Now this Omega, using the code on the bridge, would date it between 1923 and 1929. Now the theory behind that is anything that starts with 6 million is 1923 onwards, and then 7 million came in 1929. So seeing as this is 6,900,000, you can assume it's at the latter part, perhaps 1927, 1928. Now we don't know when Bill's father bought the watch, but we can only assume that he bought it from new. Around 1936, Julius joined the Hungarian army, and while serving he received a shoulder wound from gunfire from either Serbian or Russian troops. However, he downplayed this, and Bill as a boy would see the wound on his shoulder and his father would tell him that it was from a spider bite, of all things. That's sort of typical father behaviour, isn't it, really? It's the sort of thing I'd tell my daughter, I think. Here we are, I'm having trouble trying to get the yoke off the movement. It seems particularly stubborn. But there we go, it is finally released. We're nearly finished stripping down the dial side now. Just got to take out the winding pinion there and the clutch, and obviously take the cannon pinion off as well. Now the parts are in poorish condition. Some of these are a little bit rusted, but we'll have to just deal with that for now. Again, it has got an age and it has seen a little bit of action, and parts are also very scarce for this movement, and the ones that I can see so far seem quite pricey as well, so I'm hoping to try and save as much as I possibly can. So back onto the story. In 1944, Bill and his parents crossed the border into Austria. Now they were escaping the oncoming Russian invasion into Hungary. And Bill's mother was actually from Villach in Austria, so I'm guessing that's how they managed to be able to get out of the country so easy. They would then go on to live in Graz with his grandmother. In 1945, Austria was divided up into 4 parts by the victorious powers, and those were the British, the Russians, the French and the Americans. And Bill's family were in the British-controlled part of Austria. Now Julius was then recruited by the British military intelligence, and he became a translator, and then after that he also then became an interrogator, because they were interrogating people coming from the Eastern Bloc countries, and they were trying to weed out the communist infiltrators and the spies who were doing their best obviously to get over. And that must have been a very, very interesting job. I mean, given the fact that Julius was now not in his native country, his country had been taken over by the Russians, and here he was doing his bit. Very, very commendable work, certainly again with a young family and all the turmoil of having to flee Hungary as well. Fast forward on to 1952, and with the help of the IRO, which is the International Refugee Organisation, and the British military, Bill's family were finally allowed to leave. They were classed as stateless, and that's because the Russians had erased their entire existence from all the Hungarian records, something that the communists did in all of the countries where people had left. And I think that is just completely horrendous, and must have been awful to think that, you know, you now don't have a place in your homeland. So yes, they became refugees. I've got a picture here of Bill's father's passport, or his Hungarian passport, which actually says on it that he was a doctor at the University of Plex. I find that picture particularly poignant because that's his only document to his country, of which he would never be able to use again because it would never be recognised. And how sad that must be. I can't imagine what it must be like to leave everything behind, everything that you know, and then having your whole nationality stripped away from you, and all this with a young child in tow as well. And it's sad, but what's worse, in my opinion, is this thing is still happening in today's world some 80 years later, and we just don't seem to learn from the mistakes of the past, do we? Very, very sad. Now, Bill's family were given the chance to go to Australia or the USA, and they chose the USA because a lot of other Hungarians had already gone that way and had all settled in Ohio. Now, the voyage to New York took 14 days. It was very, very stormy weather, and they also had a delay by a capsized vessel that they came across in the English Channel, which we all know is the busiest shipping lane in the world. I guess it probably still was back then, so they got held up by that, but then they finally reached their new home of the United States of America and settled in Cleveland. Now, Bill's parents lived their lives happily in America. His father sadly died in 1980, I guess at the age of 82. But what a story and what a life he had. A lot of upheaval, and this watch would have been on his wrist the entire time, and if an object could tell stories, this one no doubt would have a lot of stories, and possibly quite a lot of heartache as well, I would assume. So I have to do my best by this watch. I've been really taken with that story. I find it very tragic, really, that can happen to people. And yes, I want to do it right. It's only a watch, but it means more than that now, doesn't it? It's Julius's life in this one little time machine. Going back on to Bill. So what happened to Bill? Well, he grew up in America, obviously. But in 1962-63, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. And Bill, fearing another Russian invasion, joined the US Army, where he served as a medic. And he served for 3 years, and then eventually left the army and became a teacher of biology at a university. And Bill is now retired, living out his days quite happily. He's a hobbyist artist, and he sent me some photos of his work, and I would say it's more than a hobby. I think Bill is actually very talented at art. Just look at these pictures I'm showing you now. Certainly very, very good. So there we go. That is the strip down of the watch, just about, and the story behind it. Now, I really do hope that you found that fascinating and interesting. I certainly did. And now is going to be the difficult part. We're going to have to clean this watch and hopefully find no problems with it inside, and we can get it running and do it justice. So please, at this point, wish me luck. You're about to see the pallet fork and the pallet cock fly through the air at 100 miles an hour as they ping straight off that movement. And look, I've had to go hunting for the pallet fork. There it is at the bottom of the movement holder. Now here we are with the fourth wheel, and as you can see, I've got the plastic tweezers out because I don't want to damage the wheel, but that is pretty well wedged into its but it's not a jewel hole, it's just a pivot. So I'm assuming it's rusted in or something. I don't want to force the issue, so I'm going to put it to one side. Here we are, get the setting lever screw out of the way, and that is it really. That's the movement stripped down. So on with the next part. Now I need to strip the balance down into its components, but just look here, all the dirt, debris and copious amounts of oil that's been sprayed in. So I'm fearing the worst for the hairspring, so let's try and get it out. So just need to undo the stud screw, push the stud out a little bit, and then we can take the balance cock off and have a closer look. And here we go. At first that looks a total tangled mess. But you may just about be able to see it's glistening. It all really stuck together with a lot of oil. It's going to need a good clean in some solvent. So now it's going to strip down the shock jewel assembly. It's not really a shock jewel, so to speak. It's probably more of a cap jewel actually for the balance pivot. These screws are absolutely tiny. That demonstrates what we're dealing with. Look at the size of those screws. Somebody handmade those over 100 years ago as well. Okay, now having a look at the jewels here. They're all again caked in dirt and debris, so I use a bit of pegwood. I'm going to clean as much of that off as I can. I'll then need to sharpen the pegwood as well just to get in the holes, but it's all just old dried oil, and again it's so old, this watch, who knows how many layers you're peeling back. And on the top bridge as well, it's a similar affair. These are all rubbed jewels, which means the brass is folded over the top to hold the jewel in place. And this is going to require a considerable amount of cleaning, not only to get the old debris off, but to make sure those holes in the jewels are absolutely slippery clean. Here's the crown wheel, and look, it's an absolute mess. The crown wheel is what transfers basically the wind to wind the mainspring from the crown through the ratchet basically into the spring. So some of this looks like rust, other bits actually look like dirt. So I'm just going to go crazy with the pegwood and scratch as much of that out as I can. I've looked online at the moment, at least I can't find a replacement part, but I think this with a bit of elbow grease will probably clean up well enough to be used, to be honest with you. Here we are looking at the jewels, and yes, they might look clean at first, but the third wheel jewel is cracked. There we go, you can see it here. I'm going to get a bit closer in a moment as well on the microscope. So I'm going to have to try and change a rub jewel. I've never done that before, so that's going to be quite a challenge. So let's just see how we get on. Now I need to take the jewel out. There is an argument, of course, that taking the jewel out is not necessary because it's cracked and it looks pretty clean, but I'm going to have a go. Now you need special tools for these rub jewels, and I went on eBay, and you might be able to see these. I went and bought the tools that were required. Some have a little flat end and others have a concave end, and the flat end opens out the rubbed jewel, or the brass should I say, and then the concave ones is basically to put it back in again. So I was really happy. I paid £23 for these antique tools, and they're completely useless because they're too big for this jewel. This jewel is absolutely tiny. Now there is an argument these are for pocket watches, but I don't know. The smallest one is still very small, but for now I'm going to push it out using the Horology clone tool. This is the Chinese version. I couldn't afford the real one. I've got the base set and also the little pusher, got the right size there. So we're just going to gently push out the jewel and see if we can fit the new one and somehow close over the brass to hold it in place. And just felt a little click, so I think it is out. Definitely out, and you probably can't see that, but it's in two small pieces on the bench. I'll zoom in with the other camera. Looking closely on the microscope, you can see that that has pushed out lovely. Just trying to get an oiler in here to give you a bit of perspective. There's a little rim now here, as you can see, so that's nice. All looks okay. Just try and focus in on the bottom just to be sure, and yes, to me that looks fine. Not sure what I'm supposed to be looking at really, but it looks fine to me. I'll try and either drop the jewel in or open up the hole just that little bit more, because the jewel might not just fit straight in, and then we've got to worry about how I'm going to close it back up again. Look at that, absolutely perfect, just fits straight in. Right, try and find a way to hold it in position again. You join me now about 3 weeks on. I had a hell of a game with that rub jewel. I had nothing to close the top of the brass rubbing over, and I had to go and see Clive, my watchmaking friend, and he didn't have a tool either, and you can see what's happened. It has now been rejeweled. He made such light work of this, it was absolutely unbelievable. Let's just put it on the microscope perhaps. So there you can see the jewel in situ, and what a lifesaver Clive was. Basically we didn't have anything to do those rub jewels with, and he managed to just ream out the hole, put that new jewel in, get it all nice and flush and true, and honestly it took him, I don't know, 10-15 minutes maximum. So I owe him a massive debt of gratitude, because without that help I would be stuck now with this and tried to be searching for a main plate. So one problem solved. The next problem is a pivot. So let's show you that now. Here we're looking at the wheel that was stuck in the main plate. It's sort of held in by a bit of rust, I think. If you just look here, there is a distinct amount of wear. Now you'd expect that after 100 years, I guess. And I think this little bit here is either a bit of rust or a bit of tarnish. Now, I've gone out and bought a J-Cot tool with the sole view of trying to polish this wheel and try and get that pivot better. However, I've had absolutely no practice with it. I'm left-handed. The thing is right-handed. It is an absolute nightmare for me, and I just don't want to mess this up. So I've got a different way to at least try and clean that up a little bit, which I'm going to show you now. It may help some of you as well in the future if you can't afford to go out and buy the proper tool. And we'll just see if we can make it at least a little bit better. As long as it's running freely, I think the watch will run even if it has a little bit of wobble. So let me show you what I'm going to do. After getting some advice off my Facebook group, you can get these. These are called pin polishers. It's a little arbor holds them, and it's a bit like a rubber on a pencil really. You can get them in lots of different grades. I've got in the very, very fine, but not the completely fine, or the finest. And basically we're just going to push that into there, and if I can do it properly, that's why I'm in the pin vise. Just try and get it right down. And that is a very fine abrasive, and in theory that is going to polish it all up. So I could come down on all the grades. The worry is if you take it or remove too much material, then obviously you've then got to bush the bridge, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to do this for a little while and see if it improves it at least a little bit. Here's the finished result of that. You can still see the groove, and definitely the J-Cut tool would get rid of that. But it's improved it, it's polished it enough, got rid of that corrosion, and I'm hoping that is enough really to make sure it doesn't stick. Now I've got to clean this wheel thoroughly. There is still a little bit of tarnish and maybe even a little bit of rust within those leaves as well. So still a lot of cleaning to go. Treat it to a new mainspring, of course. There's the escape wheel, nice and easy. Next wheel has the second hand attached to it on the dial side. So there's a very long pinion, sometimes hard to get through. Third wheel fits in its new jewel. And the centre wheel. And now the really fiddly bit of trying to get the bridge on and all the pivots lined up. Trust me, this isn't always easy. Some people make it look very easy in their videos, and I tell you, they'll struggle just like me on occasions. So the escape is not quite in position. It's nearly always the escape as well. But there we go. Get the screws in quick. Always test again to be sure. Some Mobius grease. As you can see, always testing. Just a little bit of D5 in there, not really necessary. This is the setting lever screw. D5 on the barrel arbor for the barrel bridge. Once again, test. Click spring just sits into the main plate. Ratchet wheel will sit on top. On goes the crown wheel. Most, if not all, of the rust was cleaned off. Reverse thread the screw. And now the pallet fork and pallet bridge or pallet cock. Now it's time to rebuild the balance, which is a little bit of a tricky job on this. The screws are microscopic along with all the other parts. Now obviously I need to oil this jewel. This is really important, and I'm going to use my auto oiler because that way I'm not going to smudge it once it's all in situ. Now the hard part is putting the really tiny screws into those holes. And as you can see, every time you nudge it, it goes out of position just slightly. There's one loosely in, should help to guide in the other. Screws are in, let's turn it over, give it an oil. Here is the oiler, all a bit blurry. I'll put it in and I'll pull up this little lever here. You won't have seen much of that, but that will have oiled it perfectly. There may be a little bit of excess, which again we just wipe off just in case. Now the next hard part is getting the hairspring and balance on. I will do a bit of this on film, but some of it will have to be done off film because it requires really close-up observation. So quite literally have to do the rest on my other microscope. Interestingly, and I don't know if you can see it, let me see if I can get the light to reflect on this bridge here. Well, it's not a bridge, is it? What am I talking about? Is part of the wheel. Actually engraved, and it says "302". There we go. That's quite interesting that a watchmaker would put that under there. Don't know what that means, but it's certainly part of its history. Before we fit the balance, I need to fit this bottom jewel. Here we go. Yes! Yes! Honestly, to see it spin, I don't know how many years it's not ran. Let's just try and get it in focus on this camera. Oh, that's great. Look at that. So pleased to see it run. 100-year-old watch. Fantastic. It doesn't look too bad either, doesn't it? We haven't ordered anything. Well, we've ordered the balance, but we haven't ordered the train jewel. So, right, I'm going to get the screw in, and then I guess we'll do the oiling. That is brilliant. This is what this hobby is all about. Honestly, bringing something back to life. I kind of knew it was going to run really, but it doesn't change anything when you see it for the first time. Now oiling all the pivots with Mobius 9010. And the same on the dial side as well. You've just got to be careful that you don't oil the pallet fork jewel, and the reason you don't do that is because it could go up a bit easier and it would stop the movement. Here we go with the cannon pinion, the winding pinion with the lovely blue grease, and there's the clutch as well. And now it's Mobius D5 for these oiling points. Slightly thicker oil. These do have a bit more friction. That's the minute wheel. Just going to put a bit of grease just in there because that's where the yoke's going to sit. Now I'll just say at this point, if you're enjoying the video, then please pause it, hit the like button. It really does help the algorithm, and I could do with all the help I can get. So if you're watching, please do me a favour. If you're enjoying it, go and click that like button. Here we are with the yoke spring. Always can be a bit tricky, these. Sometimes they like to fly away, so I'm securing it with a bit of pegwood. But there we go, it's gone in quite easily in the event. More of the Mobius blue grease. This is a thicker grease, if you like, for these very high friction points. This is the set-in lever spring. This is going to be responsible for when you pull the crown out, for it to engage the clutch into the pinion, which will then turn the minute wheel, which of course then turns the hour wheel. It's very straightforward principles. And now we'll just test that and see it in action. So there you go, the yoke has moved over and I can freely turn and then when I set it back I can then wind the mainspring. Well, elatement of seeing the movement run was very short-lived. Here it is on the Timegrapher, and it is absolute disastrous. I'm actually on 24 hours on from that. I've been messing with it a little bit, and so far I've made it probably worse. Excuse the freehand recording. But yeah, we're not getting good results in any position. It does some strange things. And I've already been on my Facebook group, which have been great help actually. Lots of people giving me lots of suggestions. Is it hairspring? Possibly. There's some issues around the regulator pins, but equally I think there is a problem in the train. Here we are with dial down, and as you can see it's just a mess. So I'm going to take the watch apart first of all and see if we can do a bit of fault finding, see if I can see anything obvious in the train and work my way back from there. So my first concern is the hairspring. It has this Breguet overcoil which you can kind of see there. I just don't like the way it sits quite low in the regulator pins. But when you actually look at the spring itself, the circles look pretty centric. It looks flat. Visually it does look okay. Excuse me for the camera going blurry. So I'm not too sure first of all whether the problem lies there. So I've gone through the train and I've actually found something that clearly I missed. Here is the pallet cock, and this jewel is really loose. Hopefully you can see it. It actually moves around in its setting, and it's that dreaded rubbed jewel again. So panicked a little bit, but luckily for me there was a watch fair that particular weekend, and I went along and I managed to pick up another set of rubbed jewel tools. I love how vintage watch tools come in these lovely little boxes, all the wear and tear on them. But there we go, it's a lovely little set. Sadly, inexperience got the better of me and I managed to push the jewel setting out. However, Clive Richardson from the Facebook group and a subscriber came to the rescue with a spare part. However, that balance cock would also not fit properly. It sort of bit down and therefore the pallet fork wouldn't work. So I had to push the old jewel back in, and I used my jeweling tool to squash it down. Unfortunately, it sat in position. However, as you can see, it made little difference on the Timegrapher readings. This thing is still running really fast and all over the place. I did find the beat error was slightly out, so I did correct that, and then I turned my attention to the balance and started to see things like this. The timing screws were slightly out, which would suggest that somebody had been trying to slow this wheel down. You can see here as well that they're in odd places, they're not opposite each other. So yes, I've never messed with timing screws, so this sent me down a whole new avenue of trouble. Also took the hairspring off, found that the balance was extremely heavy in one spot as well. So there's only one real way to solve this, and that's what you're going to find out now. The watch is running too fast. I can't regulate it with the regulating arm. So the only option I've now got is to use timing washers. Now I've never used these before, and I've just picked these up. I don't think they make them anymore either, and you can just about make them out in these little tubes, and each number on the tube is denoting a slightly different size, and we have a key here. So bit of education. This is the linear sizing. I never know if I pronounce that right. It's French, and that is the sizing of your movement, or the diameter, I think, of the movement. And what it's telling you here is number one will fit this size, and it's going to do 2 minutes in 24 hours, and so on and so forth. Now I'm going to be concentrating on these bigger ones, 10, 11 and 12, because that's what I think my linear is on my movement. And it's going to be very difficult. I can't do it on camera, unfortunately. I need all of my concentration. So here is the balance in question, and I've removed this screw here. I actually already put a timing screw on that one. You can just about see a washer, sorry. And there is the screw. This screw is so small. I will put a photo up now of it next to a penny, and then that way I think you're now going to appreciate why I need all of my concentration. This is some of the finest work that I've ever done, or intricate should I say. It's so small, these parts. So wish me luck. Hopefully the next shot you're going to see is it on the Timegrapher running a little better. Here we are on the Timegrapher, and I tell you, it is relief. I'm ecstatic, really happy, really impressed, and yeah, just overwhelmed, to be honest with you. This has been an epic challenge that you guys probably don't realise the hours and hours and hours I've spent on this movement. It's been ridiculous. Never thought I was going to get there, but here we are. Yeah, just pure elation. This thing was running, what, plus 400 minutes a day, thereabouts. It was horrendous what was going on. And if it's not for the help of a couple of guys in my Facebook group, I would never have got here. Of course, Simon Coop, some of you watching will know Simon from the group. He's a professional watchmaker, or a retired professional watchmaker, and he's given me so many tips and tricks as to what to do here, along with Chris Spinner from CS Spinner YouTube channel. I suggest you go and see him. I'm going to leave a link down below. Guy is really, really talented. Doesn't realise how talented he actually is, and he also gave me some great pointers on this one and encouragement to keep me going, because I nearly gave up. So what we're looking at, we are looking at, well, dial down, which is a nice position. The rate is now great. The beat error, I'm debating it's 5 milliseconds. I'll put a photo up now. The pallet fork is absolutely smack on in the middle, and I've changed it and changed it and changed it, and it still always seems to come back at that. And normally at 5 milliseconds the gap would be considerable and not as close as it is. So I don't know whether it's to do with those timing washers, and perhaps it's throwing it out and the Timegrapher just can't pick it up. Remember, these are just cheap things from China. I know we all use them and they're reliable, but I think when you've got something a little bit more tricky, perhaps it just can't pick it up. But yeah, so if I put it in dial up position, now it's a bit dodgy the way I do it like that, we'd still get a fairly decent trace, as you can kind of just see there now. So dial up and dial down, pretty much equilibrium, which is honestly, I never thought I was going to get there. Broken jewel, then pushing out the jewel by mistake on the pallet fork. Oh, it just goes on and on and on. However, if we do the pendant positions, this is pendant down for instance, it will drop, and it will drop to about 30 seconds a day, and it does it the same in the other positions. And that's, I guess, maybe a poise issue. I have tried to poise it. I did put a shot up earlier in the video to show you that, but it's a little bit out of my game. I've been told that the balance wheel is actually slightly out of round, so that could be also part of the problem. Anyway, it's a win. Let's carry on. Let's get the dial on. Let's see this ticking after all these years. And thanks for sticking with me. I am so happy. I think some of you out there are going to shudder at the thought of what I'm doing here. I'm trying to clean the dial up a little bit. I've kind of figured out that this, especially, is just the oil that's been left in that movement all that time and has run through the holes. I've cleaned a lot of it off here, and I've got a very, very soft piece of wood. I don't think it's pegwood, but I use it as pegwood, and I'm just dipping it in a little bit of alcohol, and then I'm having to be really careful and very light, but you can see that it does slowly but surely lift it, and then I have to keep going over it with a bit of Rodico as well. Now once again, something else that's quite difficult to film because I need my eyes on the job. This is one thing I don't want to get wrong now, and I'm not going to go to town with it and make it perfect. Just a lot of these big visible spots that have dried on, you know, for a long time, so I guess the alcohol breaks it down a little bit and loosens it up, and I don't really want to go anywhere near the print through fear of that coming off as a result. So I just thought I'd quickly show you that, because most of the time I'll never touch a dial, and I suggest most people don't touch dials either, but on this one I'm just making a slight exception. Okay, there we go. I don't really want to get much more involved than that. I think it's a massive improvement. You can go too far quite easily and ruin it, and that is not on the cards for me today. Well, my excitement was very, very short-lived. I made a real cock-up of it now. Yes, it was running okay, or okay-ish on the Timegrapher. However, I wanted to put another timing washer on it and try and make it just a bit better. And I made a fatal mistake. So we have these timing screws around the balance wheel, as you can see. And I unscrewed this one to put some weights on, put the little washers on it, and then somehow managed to try and screw it into here, and hopefully you can see the absolute disaster that now lies await. The screw went in, completely sheared. I'm guessing that hole was probably not even threaded. Absolute, honestly, you can't believe how gutted I am that I've managed to make a mistake like that. So I went to Cousins. I managed to buy some different timing screws, a whole assortment of them. I'll bring them in actually. Here we go. You can buy a little box full of them, all different sizes. Sorry, they're a little bit out of focus. And this one obviously isn't the exact size, but the thread seems to be right for the hole. So I've actually now packed it with some washers, and I'll put it on the poising tool, which I'll show you now. And the poising brings this new screw as the high point, and it doesn't actually take the low point being where the broken screw is, which is all rather bizarre to me. However, I am now going to have to try to drill this out, and I've never done anything like that before, certainly by hand. I bought some twist drills off eBay, very cheap ones to be fair. This one here is 0.1 of a millimeter, and the whole idea is to somehow set it up that I can try and turn this drill by hand, probably while holding the balance wheel. So I'm going to have to do this off camera. There's no way I can film this sensibly. And then hopefully after I've done that, maybe some adjustment on the timing screws, bring the poise a little bit further back in. So the next shot you might see is better poise, or a better trace on the timegraph. Here is hoping. Wish me the best of luck. This is probably going to take me hours of work. Well, there's the hole drilled out. It was really, really tricky, and I actually broke 2 drills doing it as well. Hopefully it's going to be alright. I've tried to poise it a bit more. I've moved a couple of screws around to try and find the heavy spot. So I'm going to put the hairspring on and put it back on the timegraph and have my fingers, toes and everything crossed. Well, balance is back on and I'm actually seeing progress. You probably aren't. We have that exceedingly fast rate again, but at least we've got a rate and a trace I can possibly work with. Now, because I've been recording this over weeks and months almost, I'm not even sure if I've said the reason why it's running so fast, and that, in my opinion at least, is because the hairspring is either not right to this balance or it's been shortened. And the only way now to slow it down is to mess around a bit more with the timing screws, trying to put some more weight on there perhaps to slow it down a bit. So yes, that's what I'm going to try and attempt now. Now I think it's a big feat. I've got over 3 minutes there to try and recover, and there's no guarantee I will do, but if I can get it, even if I can get this thing within 30 seconds a day, I will be really chuffed at this point. Yes, so watch this space. The next shot you're going to be seeing, hopefully, is a better Timegrapher result. Just look at these results. Honestly, I can't believe how pleased I am. It's absolutely brilliant. Now this footage is speeded up over a minute or so, so we do get a true reflection of what it's doing, and you can see the rate climbs and then drops a little bit, so there must be some sort of wobble in the movement. Here we are at dial down, and we get pretty much the same trace. Amplitude is great though, so I'm really pleased. I can't tell you enough. I've never had to mess around with the balance so much, so to get it as good as this, I'm ecstatic. This is the dodgy one, crown up. There's a lot of interference going on looking at that from the palette fork, I think, but I'm going to have to live with it. It is gaining, and that's all that matters. It's not losing time as it was before. Here we are, crown down, and yes, it's following on the same vein really. The beat errors opened up, and that I guess must be the poise issue, but I am so pleased. Right, let's finish the case. And here it is, finally, the finished watch. And I actually feel quite emotional. I am so pleased that I've managed to get it going again. And not only that, clean the dial, clean the case. It actually looks pretty much new now. So the transformation has been dramatic. But this thing has tested me all the way through, mentally, physically. It's been an epic video to prepare and make. I had the watch since April of this year, and have worked on it on and off here and there and in earnest in the last 2 months, whether it be filming or especially editing. The editing on this video has taken a very long time, but I had to do it justice. The story of Bill and his family, I don't know, it pulled on my heartstrings. Just still can't imagine what it must be like to just leave your country like that, in that manner. But what a brave man, and what a true hero to be. Well, be an interrogator and do his bit. Fantastic. Yes, I'm going to really enjoy wearing this watch, and I'm very proud of it, to be quite frank. A couple of little things. So the crown. Maybe some of you are thinking, well, you haven't quite done anything with the crown. And yes, it doesn't sit flush. You've got a pendant tube sticking out, and this is a flat crown on the end. But I kind of wanted to keep it. I felt that that's what Julius had put on at some point. Often I think I've seen this with other watches. They probably have small crowns to start with, and then as the gentleman gets a bit older, he can't turn the crown as much perhaps, or it falls off or wears, and they always seem to end up with a giant crown on the end of them. If you look at my Lanco video from a long time ago, very similar to this. So yes, I wanted to keep it on because I felt he touched that crown, he wound this watch, and therefore I should leave it on. Here it is next to my only other Omega, which is my Speedmaster Cosmic from about 1969. They are two very different watches from quite a reputable brand, let's face it, but generally when I'm working on Omega I have problems, and this one has definitely been problematic, that's for sure. And then here it is next to my Coventry pocket watch. Now, Coventry is the city I live in, and they were very reputable watches back in the day. And to think that the Omega and the Coventry pocket watch are probably only 10-20 years apart. So they went from this giant pocket watch movement to a very, very small wristwatch movement. This Omega is only 30 millimeters in diameter, if you can call it a diameter. And here it is on my wrist. You decide whether you think that's small, because to me that doesn't look a 30mm watch at all. Maybe it's the squareness of it. It is absolutely beautiful. But of course I want to hear what you've got to say about this video. Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy Bill's story? What do you think of the watch? Leave your comments below. I read every single comment. I try to reply to as many as I can. If you want to support the channel in some way, then please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new. There's so many videos on this channel, there's going to be something else for you to watch, that's for sure. Go and check out my website, My Retro Watches. You can see my entire watch collection. Also, there are some affiliate links on there to watchmaking tools should you want to take up this as a hobby, and trust me, it is a fantastic hobby. Check me out on my socials, Instagram, all of those goodies, and the Facebook group, of course, retro vintage watches and restorations. I leave a link down below for that. Right, I now need to go and take a break. This has been epic. Hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to see you in the next video very soon. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.